On the 9th of January 2019, the title of our episode, The Smorgasbord Shutdown. It was inspired by the number of government agencies that are actually involved in the shutdown. Let me just explain a little bit of methodology here. Roughly 75% of the government is fully functional before the smorgasbord effect took place. What we have now supposedly is departments that were shut down. The Internal Revenue Service, supposedly the administrations came up with a plan where they can process tax returns later in January. And the Department of Agriculture can issue food stamp or food sufficiency warrants there. So in other words, what you're having is a smorgasbord effect. A smorgasbord, when you go to one, there's a number of items laid out on a table, and that's basically what is happening here. Now, it is very, very problematic if the executive order is legal in itself. And, of course, it will no doubt be challenged by, as a taxpayer lawsuit. This is normally how these kinds of items are done. We're looking at the overall picture here. This is from the BBC. And it had shut down since in 1981, and the Republicans have used all of these. 1982 in September, it was November of 81, September of 1982, and December of 1982, November again of 1983, September of 1984, and October of 1984. That was during the Reagan term, and also October of 1986 and December of 1987. That was under Ronald Reagan. And again, we had a shutdown. Most of these shutdowns were less than 5 days. Looking at this is from the Congressional Research Service via the BBC. Nonetheless, in December of 95, there was also a shutdown. Now, that was the longest shutdown, more than 20 days. That was when the Republicans could not come to an accommodation here under Bill Clinton. And in September of 2013, that would have been under Barack Obama. That was one of the longer shutdowns. It was looking at it here, more than 15 days that shut down. Then we had one in January of 2018. That was less than 5 days. This is under DJ Trump. Now, this would be the third one under DJ Trump. And the other one looks like a day and a half, 2 day shutout, less than that. And the current shutdown started in December of 2018, and we are almost moving towards 20 days, and it could very well be the longest shutout in the history. Now, according to this, DJ Trump did not declare a national emergency. He gave an address from the White House. It was understood he would be giving an address from the border down in Texas, around McAllen, Texas, but that didn't occur. Supposedly he will visit the area this week on Thursday. But does it matter? Well, we're looking at the support here. Now, this is from Reuters. That 51% of the American people blame DJ Trump. That means roughly 49% or so blame the Congress or the Democrats, or who knows, maybe Moms Mabley. But the interesting point in this particular survey was that 77% of the Republicans. That means the Republican Party is overwhelmingly united behind DJ Trump. Almost 80% of the Republican Party. So thus, it's not DJ Trump, it is the Republican Party that needs a lot of work. Now, there are some senators that perhaps are on their way out the door. Cory Gardner, he's in the state of Colorado. And Susan Collins, who is in Maine, their chances of re-election is less than 50-50. And Lisa Murkowski, she's in Alaska. She just ran for re-election, so she is safe. but this is the so-called moderate part. Now we also have a graphic here from the Border Patrol Service of the United States, and this just basically shows the number of people that have been apprehended. In 2007. There were 800,000 people apprehended at the border. And in 2008, that would have been before Barack Obama took office, about 700,000. In 2009, Barack Obama was sworn in. We had roughly about 500,000 people apprehended at the border. And this shows people from Mexico and others who won't get into the others because they're minuscule. If we go to, let me see here, 2016, we had roughly a little over, about 200,000 people from Mexico and a little over 200,000 from other countries. In 2017, the last we have of the statistics, we had almost 200,000 from other countries in 2017, and about, let's see, looking at this, well, give a guess to it, a little over 150,000 from Mexico. Now, these are apprehensions there. So, in other words, it's dropped. The illegal border crossing is down from 1.6 million, that would have been in 2000, to fewer than 400,000 last year. So that is an enormous reduction, and no doubt about that, over 50%. Now we go back to 2000, that'd be roughly 19 years ago. So you can see how things are happening and what is actually going on the border in real terms. The address, which you will hear part of, is the edited address. He'll come in a minute. From DJ Trump, he was at the White House talking about it as a humanitarian situation. Well, you can't make that particular situation because in terms of humanitarian, the number of people that are in these concentration camps known as the Trump camps and where people have actually died, that is the fault of DJ Trump and his administration. It has nothing to do with any humanitarian problem there. If it were being handled properly, there would be adequate accommodations with medical care for people that are being detained, and that is not there. The private contractors that are hired are overwhelmed by the facilities. They're building more and more facilities, but not enough facilities, and they're dealing with small numbers of people. What if they were 20 years ago where they would have very, very large numbers of people? And some of this was from the campaign, talking about people murdered by undocumented workers, but the heroin sold in the U.S., 50% comes from Mexico. He doesn't know that because he could come in a UPS package across the border. It doesn't have to come by someone crossing illegally. And this is all about, according to the BBC, 4.5 billion pounds, or 5.7 billion, almost $6 billion, to build a steel barrier. Now, in recent days, old DJ Trump has talked literally about what's called in the U.S. a chain-linked fence. I guess razor wire at the top or something like that. This is supposedly a 30-foot wall now. There was a vote at one time for a wall that Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, and various other people voted for at the time, and they have was be 700 miles as opposed to 2,000. So not quite 50%, but almost 50% there. And the Washington Post have cracks in Trump's support, but that's a bit misleading. When you have 80% or almost 80% of the Republicans that actually support this, there is really not a crack in his party. Now, 20% do not. But will that have an effect in the elections? Depending, obviously, on which districts, Trump districts that you're talking about. And there are different districts with different compensations compositions, to get it right in a minute here. Anyway, if you have those kinds, such as some of the districts in Virginia that were taken over by these so-called moderate Democrats, if you have that scenario for 2020, you would lose House seats, no doubt about it, and some of those people that are up for re-election in 2020 have a much better chance of being re-elected. We're talking about the moderate Democrats. So, in effect, what does the wall do for DJ Trump? What's a campaign stunt? He can go out and say, well, I fulfilled my promise. I tried to fulfill my promise. Not sure what his situation is. But if you're using a checkerboard or smorgasbord approach where every day you're exempting more and more parts of the government, that is not even a shutdown of the 20%. You're going to end up with less than a 20% shutdown. Let's go now to what was live from the White House. DJ Trump is the edited version. And then we'll go to Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota on the House floor talking about the senator from Minnesota talking about the shutdown and how it affects people in the Midwest. And finally, to about 5 minutes or less of Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, and he is actually the minority leader, and Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the House. And then we'll have some words about the college football championship. Unexpectedly, Clemson with a blowout over Alabama, who was at the time favored to win the championship. Of course, they came up a bit short. The people in Vegas and elsewhere. It was not a pretty situation for Bama. But that's one of the things that happens in college football. And here we go. This would normally be a station break, WBRN Radio. And on the Boston Red Network, we will go now to DJ Trump.
Southern border. Every day, Customs and Border Patrol agents encounter thousands of illegal immigrants trying to enter our country. We are out of space to hold them, and we have no way to promptly return them back home to their country. America proudly welcomes millions of lawful immigrants who enrich our society and contribute to our nation. But all Americans are hurt by uncontrolled illegal migration. It strains public resources and drives down jobs and wages. Among those hardest hit are African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Our southern border is a pipeline for vast quantities of illegal drugs, including meth, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. Every week, 300 of our citizens are killed by heroin alone, 90% of which floods across from our southern border. More Americans will die from drugs this year than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. In the last 2 years, ICE officers made 266,000 arrests of aliens with criminal records, including those charged or convicted of 100,000 assaults, 30,000 sex crimes, and 4,000 violent killings. Over the years, thousands of Americans have been brutally killed by those who illegally entered our country, and thousands more lives will be lost if we don't act right now. This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart, and a crisis of the soul. Last month, 20,000 migrant children were illegally brought into the United States, a dramatic increase. These children are used as human pawns by vicious coyotes and ruthless gangs. 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted on the dangerous trek up through Mexico. Women and children are the biggest victims, by far, of our broken system. This is the tragic reality. Terrible. I will never forget the pain in their eyes, the tremble in their voices, and the sadness gripping their souls. How much more American blood must we shed before Congress does its job? To those who refuse to compromise in the name of border security, I would ask, Imagine if it was your child, your husband, or your wife whose life was so cruelly shattered and totally broken. To every member of Congress, pass a bill that ends this crisis. To every citizen, call Congress and tell them to finally, after all of these decades, protect our country. And that is what I will always do. So help me God. Thank you.
Who will each share the stories that have been experienced by folks living in our states, a shutdown that is now to 18 days and will soon become the longest shutdown in the history of the United States government. The shutdown is unnecessary, the shutdown is embarrassing, and the shutdown is painful. It's unnecessary. Why punish American workers? Why punish American citizens? No patriotic leader in their right mind would want to do that. And the thing that's so troubling about this shutdown is the overwhelming majority of people who are affected are not connected to the dispute between Congress and the President over immigration reform and border security. Why should that dispute lead farmers to not be able to reach their extension agents? Why should that dispute lead small businesses to not get their small business loan application processed? Why should a dispute about immigration block the courts of D.C. from issuing marriage licenses to people? The President praying for, urging, and then proud of a shutdown is hurting all kinds of people who are completely unconnected with the issue of dispute between Congress and the President. In that sense, it's unnecessary. And second, it's unnecessary because there are bills on the floor right now that would solve this. Bills that are bipartisan, bills that have been supported, Mr. President, by you and the other Republican colleagues in the chamber a matter of a few weeks ago. And if we took action right now, we could stop the punishment. We could end the pain, the gratuitous pain that's affecting American families and workers.
The floor today to join my colleagues in voicing my sincere hope that the President will end this senseless shutdown. The American people are tired of our country being held hostage and our economy threatened. There are real consequences. I see it all the time. Of course, my state, unlike the Senator Van Hollen state of Maryland or the state of Virginia, may not have as high a percentage of federal workers, but every worker that's been hit by this, it is the same story. At our airport, just this weekend, I talked to countless TSA officers, and they said, we will continue to do our job, but now we're not going to get paid. And so you think about these people on the front line that are doing the work for our country, that are keeping us safe, that are not getting paid because of this senseless shutdown. You hear about the garbage piling up in our national parks. You hear about people having trouble paying their rent or mortgage. You look at the fears about airport security lines. So everyday Americans are affected by this as well. Other consequences of the shutdown are less visible but deeply painful for those affected. Entrepreneurs who want to take their companies public but can't get approval by the SEC. You have rural home buyers who can't get their mortgages backed by the agricultural department. You have farmers that can't access critical loans or information about how the department will implement the new farm bill. We were so proud to pass this new farm bill in this chamber on a bipartisan basis, and something the President took credit for, and now we can't even implement it and help our farmers as they approach growing season in the spring. They don't even know what's going to happen with the new provisions of this farm bill, especially the dairy farmers in Minnesota that have been hit so hard by low prices and by the trade war that we're in. And so while this trade war is going on, we're going to also be able to now not be able to help them and deny them the help they need. Vulnerable Americans, funding for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which helps with food on the table for 38 million Americans, would be severely reduced or cut off altogether. The Department of Housing and Urban Development payments that maintain housing for 3 million Americans. It is time to put aside the political games, and it's time to get in the real game, and that is in the lives of American people to stop this shutdown. It means reopening our entire government so we can work on the issues that matter. This is a time in our country where we should not be governing from crisis. We should be governing from opportunity. After the downturn, the economy had stabilized. We should be working with the rest of the world. We should be selling our goods to market. We should be building the infrastructure in this country. We should be doing something about prescription drug prices, and we should be training our workers for the jobs that are available today and the jobs that will be available tomorrow. There are simple proposals out there. The Senate sent the House of Representatives legislation that passed through this body unanimously. Not a single senator opposed it. Yet the president suddenly changed course and once again insisted that he needs over $5 billion immediately. The new House has now passed legislation to fund all shuttered agencies other than the Department of Homeland Security through the end of the fiscal year. That includes the Treasury Department, the Ag Department, the Interior Department, government agencies that provide critical services. These non-controversial bills were originally drafted and approved by the Senate Appropriations Committee run by the Republican Party. None of this makes sense to me at all. The measures that have passed by the House are sensible. They're ones that have been supported in the past by Republicans over in this chamber. Shutdowns are not good for the economy. The 2013 shutdown, I lived through that, was estimated to cost our economy over $20 billion. The president's own economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, has estimated that this shutdown will shrink our economy by 0.1% every 2 weeks. Maybe that doesn't sound like much. Well, you know how much it really is? It is roughly $10 billion every single week. That is real money for real Americans. So stop the games. Shutting down the government should not be a negotiating tactic. If President Trump were to agree to sign the bills that the House has now passed and every member of the Senate supported last month, we would end this shutdown. Instead, critical services and our economy are being threatened with poison pill partisanship. To my colleagues in the Senate, I say this: let's get this done. We owe it to the people that we were elected to serve. We owe it to the country. As one former congresswoman once said, America should be good as its promise. This is a promise we made to them when we were elected to do the best for them and to serve our country. Let's get it done. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak directly to the American people tonight about how we can end this shutdown and meet the needs of the American people. Sadly, much of what we heard from President Trump throughout this senseless shutdown has been full of misinformation and even malice. The president has chosen fear. We want to start with the facts. The fact is, on the very first day of this Congress, House Democrats passed Senate Republican legislation to reopen government and fund smart, effective border security solutions. But the president is rejecting these bipartisan bills which would reopen government over his obsession with forcing American taxpayers to waste billions of dollars on an expensive and ineffective wall, a wall he always promised Mexico would pay for. The fact is, President Trump has chosen to hold hostage critical services for the health, safety, and well-being of the American people and withhold the paychecks of 800,000 innocent workers across the nation, many of them veterans. He promised to keep government shut down for months or years, no matter whom it hurts. That's just plain wrong. The fact is, we all agree we need to secure our borders while honoring our values. We can build the infrastructure and roads at our ports of entry. We can install new technology to scan cars and trucks for drugs coming into our nation. We can hire the personnel we need to facilitate trade and immigration at the border. We can fund more innovation to detect unauthorized crossings. The fact is, the women and children at the border are not a security threat. They are a humanitarian challenge, a challenge that President Trump's own cruel and counterproductive policies have only deepened. And the fact is, President Trump must stop holding the American people hostage, must stop manufacturing a crisis, must reopen the government. Thank you. Leader Schumer?
Thank you, Speaker Pelosi. My fellow Americans, we address you tonight for one reason only. The President of the United States, having failed to get Mexico to pay for his ineffective, unnecessary border wall, and unable to convince the Congress or the American people to foot the bill, has shut down the government. American democracy doesn't work that way. We don't govern by temper tantrum. No president should pound the table and demand he gets his way, or else the government shuts down, hurting millions of Americans who are treated as leverage. Tonight, and throughout this debate and throughout his presidency, President Trump has appealed to fear, not facts, division, not unity. Make no mistake, Democrats and the President both want stronger border security. However, we sharply disagree with the President about the most effective way to do it. So, how do we untangle this mess? Well, there's an obvious solution. Separate the shutdown from arguments over border security. There is bipartisan legislation supported by Democrats and Republicans to reopen government while allowing debate over border security to continue. There is no excuse for hurting millions of Americans over a policy difference. Federal workers are about to miss a paycheck. Some families can't get a mortgage to buy a new home. Farmers and small businesses won't get loans they desperately need. Most presidents have used Oval Office addresses for noble purposes. This president just used the backdrop of the Oval Office to manufacture a crisis, stoke fear, and divert attention from the turmoil in his administration. My fellow Americans, there is no challenge so great that our nation cannot rise to meet it. We can reopen the government and continue to work through disagreements over policy. We can secure our border without an ineffective, expensive wall. And we can welcome legal immigrants and refugees without compromising safety and security. The symbol of America should be the Statue of Liberty, not a 30-foot wall. So our suggestion is a simple one. Mr. President, reopen the government and we can work to resolve our differences over border security, but end this shutdown now.
That was Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader of the Senate. Let me just get one other thing and we'll do the sports here. And we'll go to the Washington Post. Part of the problem with a polarized nation as we have it now, DJ Trump has more and more appealed to the hard right of his party. And that appeal to the hard right has caused problems. The legislation that he has tried to bring about has caused many problems for his administration, including the ill-advised repeal of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Senator McCain, the late Senator McCain, put the ice on that particular one, period. And this is one of the instances that it just simply does not go forward. And looking at this is from the Washington Post. Trump won the night Schumer and Pelosi lost. This is by Max Thiessen, I suppose how he pronounces his name. According to him, Trump did something, DJ Trump that is, Tuesday night, that he rarely done since making office. He used the president's bully pulpit. It was much of a pulpit. Speaking from the Oval Office for the first time in his presidency, I thought he'd spoke before from the Oval Office, embraced our country's traditions as a nation of immigrants, declaring America's proudly welcomes millions of immigrants, period. He shared the heartbreak story. Well, that's from the campaign there. This guy is a right-wing columnist here, period. and he's ended it up. Until now, Trump had owned the 18-day shutdown, but prompted his address because he's the one who started it. But if Democrats continue to attack him, it won't entertain any compromise. Soon the shutdown will be theirs. That will not happen because the way that Trump has set it up, it will be Trump's little baby, let's just say, and that will be what it will be. The president's tied one more gambit in the battle he seems to be losing. Different. So this is by Dan Balls. Dan Balls is a veteran columnist at the Washington Post. Past presidents have used the Oval Office prime time to announce the military actions to lay out major initiatives that are called upon called to calm the nation's nerves in times of stress. DJ Trump chose the gravity of the venue for a far different reason on Tuesday night, to try and create a sense of national crisis in pursuit of an elusive campaign promise. With the government in partial shutdown, talks with the Democratic congressional leadership stalemated over funds for the border. As skillful as he is at dominating the national conversation, he has been singularly ineffective in this battle to change public minds or weaken the will of the Democratic opposition. That is a factual situation. Has tried many things to gain the upper hand. When you have the lower hand, it's very difficult to get the upper hand. Since he's cast blame on the Democrats, he's tried to Twitter and short videos from the South Lawn. Well, the whole idea of a national address from the Oval Office in 2019 is less effective, and the reason for that is although the so-called traditional national corporate media carried it, their sway with the public is much less now than it was. And that does affect the Oval Office address, because some people were playing various games, many were watching videos and other things. Mr. Balls goes on to say the Republicans lost 40 seats in the midterm, which is why Trump's principal adversary in the fight over border funding is newly empowered Democratic Speaker, that is Nancy Pelosi. The president will follow his address with a trip to the border. That would be meaningless. His trips and his posturing, like the address tonight, to his partisans, it matters. To others, it does not really matter at all. Above all, if the nation truly faces a humanitarian and security crisis, why should the government remain partially shut down? Very good question there that is usually answered on the first day of a logics class. Anyway, particularly workers at the Department of Homeland Security, as the former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, long a critic of this president, put it on MSNBC ahead of the speech. It justifies logic. Well, no doubt about that. And many things that this operation does. And this is one thing for people new to politics, becoming active in politics, viewing these various political talking heads, to remember the political game has never been a rational game, and it never will be a rational game, so you can forget about that one. Logic does not necessarily enter the room. Propaganda does, period. The Vice President Pence, in a round of interviews on Tuesday, said more than 60,000 people were apprehended along the border in both October and November, up from the 50,000 in September. Well, so what? They reached this mark in October and November of 2016. Then it dropped dramatically. So that's probably part of it has caused it. When the White House press secretary Sarah Sanders, I don't hear much about her, tried that with Chris Wallace, the moderator of Fox News Sunday, he set her straight and almost, and all of those caught were at the airports, not the borders. The administration has manipulated statistics to try to persuade Americans that a genuine crisis exists. The most glowing claim was that 4,000 terrorists have been caught crossing the border. Now, actually, that is at airports. On Tuesday morning, Pence tried to use artful language to repeat the 4,000 figure when called on by Haley Jackson. He shifted ground, noting that 3,000 special interest aliens had been identified as trying to come across the border. That designation is not at all the same as the designation of those that are terrorists. So in other words, a lot of play on numbers here. The Oval Office addresses are usually designed to speak to a wider audience, to rally the nation rather than divide it, to build a broad coalition as possible for tasks ahead. In this case, the president appealed to three related audiences in mind: the Republicans on Capitol Hill, especially those in the Senate, those whom support he must keep to his fight going, and those patients may be wearing thin. The most loyal supporters who believe that the president's promise to build a wall that Mexico would pay for, and finally some small percentage of Americans who views about the wall aren't already set. Well, most Americans look at this wall as nothing. Even people in the Southwest. We're talking about Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and some of California. Look at it based as a joke. They've been living in this situation for a very, very long time period. It's by Eric Wimple here. The networks interrupted their programming for the lamest rerun on TV. This is also from the Washington Post here. Get a little bit. Major broadcast networks did all manners of juggling to accommodate Trump. For what then did CBS prompt its mid-season premiere of the FBI? Oh, boy. And anyway, the Fox delayed The Gifted, and what ABC aired repeats of Ellen's Game of Games. I have no idea what that is supposed to be. Every week, 300 of our citizens are killed by heroin alone, 90% of those of which flows across the southern border. Well, a lot of that is made in West Virginia. Anyway, it should be noted that these criminal convictions cover a range of offenses, including many that are nonviolent, probably jaywalking. So in other words, the fact checkers, they don't employ the fact checkers with DJ Trump. They pretty much quit that because it's not factual. Then you get into the situation of fake news by the fact checker. So in other words, it's a lose-lose proposition, and you'll hear from many of the pundits here where they're playing on words, and the words in themselves don't mean very much at all. Period. And let's see what else we have. We had one article here, and I don't see it right now. It is about one of these heritage ideologues that is behind the DJ Trump propaganda efforts on behalf of the wall. He's one of these characters that's been around. And when you get, especially when you get the hard right types, speaking of Miller or some of the open fascist types that Trump has, you get into a situation that you're having just increased problems presenting it to anyone. Here's a guy right here, partisan warrior with little experience, steers it. This is one of these characters, what's his name? Russell T. Vaughn took the helm of the Office of Management Budget a little over a week ago after the agency began closing their doors. A few days later, he used his perch to make several controversial decisions aimed at blunting the impact, meant to buy time. Vaughn led the decision to allow the IRS to pay refunds during the shutdown, something that hasn't been previously allowed, and that some Democrats call legally dubious. You can expect taxpayers' lawsuits here. He was also involved in efforts to find money to pay for food sufficiency of food stamps. That's in February. And Vaughn briefed Republicans on both decisions Tuesday night in an attempt to ensure nervous lawmakers to stand by Trump's funding there. They are getting nervous because, especially the tax returns. Several officials involved in the shutdown say they have had a hard time getting a clear directives from the Office of Management and Budget. This Vaughn is a conservative ideologue, no doubt about that, and he's been around the Heritage Foundation. I wouldn't know him if he walked down the street. That's from Patrick Leahy. He's from Vermont. He's 42 years old. Has won pundits in the administration for his energy. Well, he may have a lot of energy, but not much sense. He is always the kind of hands on the deck. That's from Mark Short, who used to be the legislative director there. This character has been around writing for 15 years. He was on the staff of what's called a Republican study group, and later a top official with the political arm of the Heritage operation. He was hired by old Mike Pence and Mulvaney there. So in other words, and also he's a right-wing Christian who said Muslims simply do not simply have a decent theology. He said they do not know God because they rejected Christ, his son. Well, so have the Jews. I hate to tell him that. I'm a Christian. I believe in Christian set of principles, and no doubt he does. And his set borders on fascism. So there's so much for Mr. Bond. He used to also write with the Red State. That's where what's his name used to be around. I forget his name even now. From Georgia, you don't hear much about him anymore. He argued that conservatives in the House should push the party as far to the right as possible. They've been doing that pushing. That is at least the conservative caucus, but the further they push their problems. He was Mr. Freedom Caucus, and this is flippable. There's no freedom there before it existed. That is from Kirk Badella, a former GOP staffer. So that is so much on him. Let's go do the sports here, and we'll do the numbers themselves. We'll do the NBA scores, and then we'll get back to college ball. The Pacers were at the Cavaliers in Cleveland. Pacers 123 to 115 for the Cavaliers. The Wizards were at the 76ers in Philadelphia. 132 for the Sixers and 115 for the Wizards. The Nuggets were at the Heat. Nuggets 103 to 99. Nuggets have been winning some games lately. The Hawks and Raptors. It was the Raptors 104 to 101 for the Hawks. The T-Wolves and Thunder in OKC. T-Wolves pulled it out. Of course, they recently fired Thibodeau, who's their coach, by 2 points, 119 to 117. The Kings and Suns in Phoenix, where it's warm. Suns 115 to 111. The Knicks and Warriors in California. The Warriors 122 to 95 for the Knickerbockers. The Hornets and the Clippers in Los Angeles. It was the Clippers 128 to 109 to the National Hockey League. And what games were there? The Wild and Bruins in Boston. And the Bruins shut out the Wild. The Devils and Sabres. It was the Devils, it was the Sabres 5-1. I'm looking at it here. Anyway, the Hurricanes and the Islanders. The Hurricanes 4-3 over the Islanders. The Panthers and Penguins in Pittsburgh. 5-1. The Penguins over the Panthers. The Flyers and the Capitals. It was the Capitals 5-3. That was the final. The Canadiens and the Red Wings. It was the Canadiens 3-2. The Blue Jackets were shut out by the Lightning 4-0. The Stars and the Blues in St. Louis. It was the Stars 3-1 over the Blues. The Avalanche and the Jets. Winnipeg. I kind of like that phrase. 7-4 Jets over the Avalanche. I guess the Avalanche didn't have any snow. The Rangers and Golden Knights of Las Vegas. It was the Knights 4-2. That was the final. And the Oilers and the Sharks. It was the Sharks 7-2. And back to college Football, the national championship had just been played, or has been just played, at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, California, where Clemson stunned Alabama 44-16 in the college football playoff national championship, handing old Nick Saban his worst loss as the Tide coach. The Tigers improved to 2-1 against the Tide in national titles, and here, the worst part of the rest of college football. Clemson star quarterback, that is Trevor Lawrence, and the receiver Ross are actually true freshmen. But it's never too early to look ahead to next year. The 2020 top 10. Of course, the Tigers and Clemson that would be in the top. We can look at Clemson Tigers number 1. They had a 15-0 record in the ACC, and 8-0 in the ACC. Let me start that off there. Return starters: 8 on the offense, 8 on the district, 1 on the defense, 1 on special teams. The Alabama Crimson Tide: 8 on the offense. These are people returning. 9 on defense, 1 on special teams. They lose some people there. Isaiah Buggs is the defensive end, and so forth and so on. Well, the Georgia Bulldogs being number 3, they were 11-3 and 7-1 in the SEC. The Ohio State Buckeyes, they always rank high in these polls. They were 13-1 last time around, and 8-1 in the Big Ten. And they lost their quarterback, and some other people there will not be back. Notre Dame, the Fighting Irish, they had 12-1. It's a good record. And they'll be ranked number 5 this time around. The Oklahoma Sooners, they were 12-2 and 8-1 in the Big 12, which I believe they used to call themselves the Big 8. Anyway, so they are ranked number 6. They will lose Kyler Murray, their quarterback, who won the Heisman Trophy. And Murray, winner, is leaving to either play baseball for the Oakland A's or perhaps in the NFL draft. Well, hopefully he goes to baseball. Number 7, the Florida Gators. That speaks for itself. The Texas Longhorns, it used to be a respectable team in years past, is number 8 in this. And Texas A&M, the Aggies, 9th in this poll. That's dubious, too. The LSU Tigers, number 10. They were 10-3 and 5-3 in the SEC. Yeah. The Wolverines of Michigan, they were 10-3 and 8-1 in the Big Ten. Jim Harbaugh is trying to get a season going there. The Oregon Ducks, I always liked that name. Used to go with a lady from Oregon. Anyway, 9-5 was their record, and it was not a very good record. 5-4 in the Pac-12 now. And let's see, I just jumped ahead of myself a little bit here. The Washington State Cougars, they are ranked 13. The Syracuse Orangemen, I used to do a little work at Syracuse. Anyway, they are 15. The Washington Huskies out of Seattle, they were 10-4, and they were 7-2 in the Pac-12. Had a good defense. Penn State, the Nittany Lions, old Joe Paterno's team, the late Joe Paterno, they were 9-4 record and 6-3 in the Big Ten. Yeah, not that great. Number 18, the Utah Utes, 9-5 and 6-3 in the Pac-12. The Northwest Wildcats, out of the Chicago area, they were 9-5 and 8-1 in the Big Ten. And they lost their quarterback, Clayton Thornton, whomever Clayton Thornton was. And number 20, the Iowa Cyclones out of Iowa City, Iowa. And the Wisconsin Badgers, they are 21. They were 8-5 and 5-4 in the Big Ten. Not a very good team. Missouri Tigers, they are 22. Oh well, 8-5 and 4-4. Not very good there either. The Auburn Tigers, they were 23. They have to play Bama. They are the so-called country people. And the Nebraska Cornhuskers, who in the 70s were a very good team. They haven't been there so long. They've forgotten, I guess. I don't know, Warren Buffett even bothers to go to games anymore. Anyway, they were 4-8 last year and 3-6 in the Big Ten. Army was ranked 25. I'm not sure why that happened. Where were they? Oh, they had a good record, 11-2 in their conference. So that does it for sports here. The Smorgasbord Shutdown, the title of the episode on the 9th of January 2019 of WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This is Boston Red from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Good day. Have a good rest of your week. We shall return. We incidentally are working on an open source report. That is our technology report. And we also have on the international affairs part. We've been working on it for several days here now. We'll get it out on the Yellow Jackets in France and various other things that we have not gotten out.